This is the Tallahassee Business Podcast, brought to you by the Greater Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to our sponsor, 223 Agency, a digital relations firm helping you maximize and develop your digital footprint. Check them out on the web at 223agency.com. Without further ado, enjoy this episode of the Tallahassee Business Podcast.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sue Dick, and I'm President and CEO of the Greater Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce. Very excited to have a friend here with us today, Doug Wheeler, President and CEO of the Florida Ports Council. And I'm really excited about our conversation. What we want to try and do as a Chamber of Commerce is highlight a couple of things that are very unique to our community. We are lucky in Tallahassee to have executives that could be located not only anywhere in the state, but anywhere in the country based on their expertise, running organizations that have large economic footprints. And we're going to learn a little bit about one of those industry sectors from Doug Wheeler, who's here with us today, and very excited. I think our listeners are going to be intrigued to know the scope of what you do and the fact that you actually live here and are a resident and love our community. So Doug, thanks for being with us today.
No, it's great to be here, Sue. Thanks for having me. It's obviously, as you know, I have a soft spot in my heart for Chamber of Commerce world. And so it's great to be here, taking an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we do in front of my hometown chamber. Very
good. Well, tell us a little bit before we jump into the ports world, maybe let our listeners know a little bit about you, both professionally and personally, and why we're so lucky to have you here in Tallahassee.
Yeah, well, I'll keep it brief. I was actually born in Tallahassee and moved to New Orleans with my family. I was probably about 11. So as I tell people, I spent my impressionable years in the Big Easy, learned how to eat and drink and appreciate art and music and history. So I wouldn't trade that time there for anything, although I'm certainly not looking to go back to live there. But and then came back to Tallahassee to go to Florida State, graduated, and pretty much have spent the rest of my career here in Tallahassee with the sort of association, government affairs, tilt background. Spent several years with the National Association of Builders and Contractors, but worked very closely with many of our local contractors and our local chapter here, ABC North Florida. And then spent about 6 years as the senior management team with Mark Wilson and his group over at the Florida Chamber of Commerce. And of course, that's you and I certainly go back quite a bit, ways I won't date it. But and then kind of stumbled, honestly, into this role with the Florida Ports Council. I've been here just over 10 years. It's been a great run. We've had a really good, I'll tell you, there's something for timing, because when I came in shortly after Governor Scott came in and took a real interest in ports and committed real investments to those seaports, and really was a game changer. But, you know, I think it's always funny. I always tell people, because they're always like, oh, where are you based? And I'm like, oh, in Tallahassee. And they're like, does Tallahassee have a port? Well, St. Mark's does technically, but you know, I've always loved Tallahassee. I can't really see myself leaving. As a city, it's been a great place to raise my kids, and I'm an FSU guy, so that counts. And I love pretty much anything in the woods or water. So this area offers all of that, and a great business community. So it's always good to be here, and I'm looking forward to staying for a while as well. So
right, wonderful. Well, we're glad you're here. So maybe go ahead and define for individuals Florida Ports Council, and maybe also for all of us that live in this great state, what an asset our ports are, just the scope of how many there are, and just to get a visual as people listen.
Well, so really think of the Florida Ports Council as like many of the, I think, 400 or 500 other trade associations that are such a huge impact to the local community, from a financial situation, from a jobs situation, probably an industry. The association industry headquartered in Tallahassee is probably an underappreciated and undervalued industry to the average person, I would guess. But so the Florida Ports Council represents Florida's 14 public deep water seaports from around the state. So from Pensacola over in Northwest all the way down to Key West, and back up the East Coast up to Jacksonville and Fernandina at the state line. And really what we've been able to do is bring these ports together and represent them through leadership through a collective voice in the areas of advocacy at both the state and federal levels, as well as some research and data, and then marketing and communications. And so Florida's seaports are really, they're a tremendous economic generator for the state. There's no denying that. They're really just essentially catalysts for commerce. They're sort of these local community assets that are being leveraged to generate commerce and business, whether that be regionally, locally, or globally, and connecting these communities to vital national and international markets. These activities at our ports are generating about $117 billion annually, with about $86 billion of that coming annually in trade. They're generating local and state tax revenues of about $4.5 billion around the state. And as a whole activities, these are supporting about 900,000 jobs. So certainly a real value, not only to the local communities in and around our ports, because they certainly have regional components to them, but also to the state economy and really to the national economy as well. So, they're important. They're sort of that everybody drives by their port, but doesn't really understand what goes on and how that works, and just sees the big ships. But there's no question Florida's a maritime state, and we've got 14 of these assets around the state, and we're continuing to do everything we can to leverage the economic benefits from those ports.
Well, and I think, it's all about really the job and the commerce that comes out of it. No denying with COVID looming over us, like every industry, our ports have been impacted. Maybe if you can highlight what the ports have done in response to this crisis and how that world is being impacted.
Sure. Well, so there's really, during this critical time, our ports, and really no differently than businesses and families across the state, have been hit hard, but we're a resilient state. We prove that every summer after summer after summer. This summer, no different. And we will recover. I'm confident of that. I'm confident that our seaports will likely play a very big role in that recovery. As I mentioned, we're about $117 billion. Our ports are delivering pretty much everything that people, businesses, residents, consumers in our state are using in their everyday life. So furniture, clothing, fuel, food, salt, sugar, fertilizer, automobiles, it goes on and on. There's really not a cargo that our ports really can't handle. And then, really when you talk about the cruise industry, Florida is the global cruise leader. It's undisputed. We have the top 1, 2, and 3 cruise ports in the world located here in Florida. We're generating about 62% of all U.S. cruising, and moving, we were moving about 18 million cruisers through our ports annually. And so that's a huge industry, that if you'll bear with me for a minute, let me kind of set the stage so we have an idea of what happens when you sort of turn that spigot off, as the CDC did with cruising. But this is an industry that's touching restaurants, hotels, retail, taxis and Uber drivers, shuttle drivers, right? The lady that serves breakfast in the hotel across from the cruise port, that people are going to have breakfast before they get on their ship. It really goes on and on. We're now hearing about farmers who are, because schools were reduced and closed and the cruises, that they're starting to feel the pinch. So, if you, just from a scale, if you take, one of the larger cruise ships that comes into a port, we see these day in, day out all year long in Florida. And when that company has to come in and get all the garbage, all the people off, and then put all the new food back on, about 5,000 lobster tails, 23,000 ice cream cones, right? Just random, 14,000 pounds of potatoes, right? 9,000 heads of lettuce, 8,000 pounds of cheese, 18,000 pounds of beef, 48,000 eggs, and 5,000 pounds of bananas, and in my case, 179 bottles of bourbon, right? So this goes on across at least 5 of our home ported cruise ports all year long. And so that industry, basically with COVID, you just had a spigot go off. I mean, we've got some ports that have seen 80% of their revenues literally just turned off overnight for the last, 9 months. So, those are losses that are beginning to really mount and really have tremendous impacts. I mean, I think initially we were seeing some of the cargoes. Steel was one of the early cargoes that we saw kind of drop off. Then it was automobiles. But our cruise ports are still pretty vulnerable. There's honestly, I'm not sure we'll have any, maybe a few in 2020. And it's probably well into the second quarter of 2021 before you see a real level of cruising returning. So when you talk impacts, they're big. They're big. We had an estimate done to look at the impacts through 2020. These estimates are generating about 169,000 jobs lost in this industry, about a total of a $23 billion loss in economic activity across the state. And then, of course, that includes, $775 million in local and state tax revenues. So, and then from a cargo standpoint, we're seeing about an eighth of a reduction in containers, about 500,000 containers reduced, which is significant. About 5.5 million tons of liquid bulk. We do, it's ironic because really the key we've always touted about Florida's ports is that we're so diverse. And that's what's really keeping a lot of our ports in stable condition right now is the cargo. So, to see some of that initially, fuel, like I said, dropped off just tremendously. Nobody was flying, nobody was driving. Yeah. Then we saw, like I said, the steel when the manufacturing started to shut down. So we're looking at like 10 million fewer cruisers. So it's big, and honestly, they continue to grow, and at all levels and across all industries, really. So it's unfortunate because we were really doing well up until this crisis. And while I have optimism for our recovery, it really was a real momentum killer in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, I mean, there's still a lot of unknown as it relates to the pandemic. So as you plan and as you map towards 2021, what do you think some of the things that are going to be needed to be able to move forward through the pandemic as it relates to the port and just the industry in and around it?
Yeah, well, I think, look, first and foremost, our ports, their top priority has been to remain open and active and ensuring that the steady flow of critical cargo such as medical supplies and fuel and food continues to move through the ports. And I think they have been playing a critical role in that and continuing, but they're also having to look at starting to put, some of these safety measures in place in order to protect the maritime workforces, whether that be cargo or cruise. So a lot of things put in place to just be able to maintain a basic state of operational readiness. And some of that's included from a personnel standpoint of teleworking or staggered office hours, and a lot of the typical cleaning protocols. We've seen cruise terminals retrofit their HVAC systems to the higher level filtration systems. That will certainly help. We're seeing from at least the port standpoint again, their new sanitation protocols and things like that. And they've installed touch-free access points. So now we're still waiting to see a lot. The CDC has sort of come out with its latest round of what is going to be required from a cruise standpoint in order for them. And it's pretty stringent. So I think, when you look at cruising specifically, it looks like you're going to need to be tested before you get on the vessel, probably on port. And I believe they're talking about testing it as you get off to your port of call locations as well. I think those port of call locations will be altered. A lot of these cruise lines have their own private islands. I think you're going to initially see shorter cruises, 3-day, 5-day, probably less capacity, right? So they'll run at 25 or 50% capacity. Part of that is sort of that testing of these new procedures. They're going to increase the water temperature that they do linens with. The self-serve buffets are, those are gone. Probably staggered dinner reservations. So there's a lot of things they can do, and I'm sure there'll be mask protocols for certain areas of the vessels as well. And certainly boarding and all that. But a lot of that has to do with consumer confidence, right? So for many cruisers, I could probably sell a cruise tomorrow, booked, solid, right? But for a lot that are still hardcore cruisers, they still have a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainties. And so those are the folks I think that the industry is going to have to, the industry as well as the ports themselves are going to have to be able to demonstrate that that these protocols are in place and that they are effectively doing what they can to protect the cruisers and the workers.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think everybody's got a wonderful scope, and thank you for teeing up people realizing we're talking about 14 ports of entry here in our state. Maybe if you can, as we move towards wrapping up, if you can bring it back maybe to a regional perspective to really have our listeners in the region kind of think about the North Florida piece and the ports that are maybe all along that touch into the I-10 or the I-75 corridors, and your vantage point, what opportunities are there for North Florida? And then I'm obviously in and around the Tallahassee-Leon County area. And this does play into the assets that come with ports, but maybe in your professional perspective, and as we look to the future, what opportunities, with every crisis there are opportunities. So maybe what you're forecasting out for.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Tallahassee-Leon County is in actually a great area from a geography standpoint, because really from a drayage, you put a product on a truck or a train, and to take that to say Jacksport, which would really be the closest big major diverse port, I mean 2.5 hours, that's nothing. That's very doable, very attractive for a manufacturer, so to speak, who could come in, perhaps get land a little cheaper, right? Because he's got to drive a little closer. But just to the west, let me pause on Port St. Joe, but there is really good news on Port St. Joe. I think we've broken the chicken and egg dilemma there. But just to the west of that, you have Port Panama City. I'm telling you, this is the port that could. This port is having a record year despite the COVID-19. They're diverse. They have on-site manufacturing. They have container cargo, frozen cargo, you name it. I mean, they're doing trade with Mexico and multiple countries. And a lot of people wouldn't really realize that, Panama City has this port that is really growing. They just added a whole new east terminal, which is a game changer from a capacity standpoint. So I look to see tremendous growth opportunities there. And again, a drayage to or from that port to this community is well within acceptable, means. And then as far as Port St. Joe goes, that's been a real struggle, but it looks like they are prepared to start handling a customer that wants to use the downed timber in the panhandle from Hurricane Michael, which from what I understand at this point is useless for just about anything other than to grind up and then send to Honduras to be made into wood chips for them to use, I think, in some of their energy fabrication. So that looks like that's happening. As a matter of fact, I think they even got their first shipment of the wood scraps from maybe Pensacola. And so there's a few things we still got to get going there. The channel needs a little bit of work. There's a rail bridge spur that needs a little bit of work, but boy, it seems like we finally kind of broke that. And so again, from a drayage standpoint, you look at a port that has, easy connections to the interstate system. It's got water, it's got rail, and it's got land. And so from, as an economic development standpoint, this is a real opportunity. And so I do think, and I'm struggling for the name, and maybe you can help me, but there was a program created called Gulf to Gadsden, maybe, a multi-county regional sort of consortium that wants to really focus on capitalizing on some opportunities. I know that doesn't quite come to our region, but logistics really doesn't know, county lines and things like that. So, and then I think it's kind of outside my realm. And I know my good friend at the airport, David Pollard, is interested, but I do think that there are real opportunities for us with the airport. The potential to reconnect the airport to the old rail spur just off property could be tremendous. And again, this could still be customers that would be using our ports, right? So you could have a manufacturer that needs his supplies flown in, and then he's going to put his product together, and then she can find a truck or a train to get it to Jacksonville or Panama City. So I think we're really in a good position to, particularly as those 3 ports and maybe even a Port of Fernandina, which is sort of in a growth mode, as those continue to grow, I think we have real opportunities. But we're going to have to continue to make sure we're focusing on that here in our own community and making sure that we are letting people know that from a geographic standpoint, a logistics standpoint, we're actually in a pretty good position, and we offer way more from a business climate standpoint than most of the communities in between those ports to the east and to the west, right? Without being unfriendly to our neighbors, but you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Well, and I think, everybody wants to know, well, what's the value and really what's the definition of Tallahassee International Airport? You touched on it with the customs and the clearance and the cargo opportunity. That's part of the international designation. So it was very strategic in trying to secure that for our airport. And you just laid out really the roadmap of what that looks like and why. You need all of those pieces to come together. Well, there's so much more we could talk about. Doug, thanks for what you're doing. This is important. It's important for our state. It's important for our region. But most importantly, you've offered to be a part of all of these conversations and to help in any way. And we will certainly continue to tap into that knowledge. Any closing comments or remarks you want to make?
No, look, I think our ports have had a long history in this state, and I think they will continue to do everything they can to help our state recover, help our state grow. We're going to need a little bit of time, and maybe a little bit of money. We'll see what that is, but I'm confident that we will be a big critical part in our state's recovery. And it was great to be here. Thanks for all you do, Sue, and the Tallahassee Chamber for our hometown business climate. It's one that we never ceases to amaze me as this town continues to grow. My parents were just in last week, and they just can't believe, the Cascades. So it's a great community, and I appreciate everything you guys are doing. So.
Thank you, Doug. We look forward to continuing working together. Have a great rest of, of what's left of this year, and we'll end 2021 successfully. But thank you, Doug, for all you do. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Good talking to you, Sue.
All righty.
Bye-bye.